Vampirici. Vinagro-pieci.
For pretty much all of vampire history, they've been pretty well at the top of the food chain. They feast on humans, they turn humans into their kind, and generally do a fantastic job of avoiding their own deaths at the hand of other creatures. At least, things are different on that point in Blade 2. For the first time, vampires encounter real hunters coming after them, and they do nothing but helplessly watch their own species being exterminated. It is in Extremis that they must ally with the half-vampire hunter they wish to kill. The monster forcing this alliance is called a Reaper, and he's not an old monster. Instead, the Reapers are an experimental creation in an effort to make vampires more resilient. This experiment, unfortunately, went about as well as you expected, and produced something with an appetite they couldn't control. So, what exactly is with the Reapers, and why are their bodies not your standard vampires? Let's find out. What are the Reapers, and why do even vampires fear them? The Reapers are effectively another breed of vampire, though they've been driven by thirst so much that not only do they feed on humans, but they feed on other vampires as well. This destabilizes everything because normally the creatures you used to consider the predators now have something hunting them. The only reason the vampires come to the only person they'd normally consider their enemy is this. The vampire overlord, Eli Damaskinos, sends Nissa and Assad to try and set up a truce, as they know if the Reapers kill off the vampires, they'll start on humans. So he calls on Blade. Blade agrees to help and forms a partnership with the Blood Pack, a team of vampires trained to hunt Blade. What makes matters far worse, though, is how fast the Reapers multiply. In their greed and bloodthirst, their victims don't simply die, they have to suffer. In doing so, their flesh contorts and disfigures as the virus takes over their body. This can even spread via a single bite. Priest who's bitten starts transforming about 20 minutes later. Now, you're not only up against one bloodthirsty monster, but potentially dozens of others. With each successful bite, another potential Reaper can be created. So there's no easy way to contain them. The Reapers are another problem people never thought they would be up against. The vampires, however, are no longer the hunters. In contrast, they've become the prey. Where did the Reapers actually come from? Damaskinos' failed experiment. The Reapers weren't actually some long-dormant mutations that have only been waiting for their time to arise. The Reapers are actually a strain that was engineered by one of the most powerful figures in the vampire nation. The vampire by the name of Eli Damaskinos had been researching vampire genetics because he wanted his own race free from its frailties that had haunted vampires for so long, such as garlic and silver. Damaskinos wanted to breed his own race of vampires to be stronger than himself, instead of accepting his own race as weaker than he was. The first subject of this experiment was Jared Nomak, and he's also not just another Reaper who just happened to turn up later, he was the first Reaper. So all the other Reapers are descendants of what happened to him. The experiment was deemed a failure because while it rid the creature of some of its natural weaknesses, it developed a different characteristic in exchange. Nomak was more insatiable than any other vampire and had the ability to feed on other vampires. There's even a more horrific detail to the story, though. Nomak was not just any random vampire chosen. He was Eli Damaskinos' own son. So this is not just an experiment that produced unwanted offspring. Damaskinos used his own son to create an even stronger form of vampire, only to produce this. When Nomak eventually escaped, there was even more of an issue, since he'd created one failed experiment which could potentially wipe out the entire vampiric race. Who is Jared Nomak, and why is he patient zero? Jared Nomak is the first of his kind, a Reaper. So, in many ways, he's where it all began. And although, like all of the other Reapers, Nomak is addicted to blood, he differs from his offspring, and that he retains much more of his mind because Nomak can think and talk, and most unnervingly knows exactly what has been done to him. He's much more dangerous than those creatures driven by pure appetite. It wasn't some random series of rampages. Nomak had a purpose. Because he understands that Damaskinos, his own creator, is behind his demise. Nomak intends to return to his maker, spreading the blood-cursed epidemic among humans and vampires along the way in his quest for revenge. This awareness is what sets Nomak apart from the myriad Reapers that followed him, for they're driven more exclusively by the urge to feed on blood, and are unable to exercise the same clear thought and purpose that Nomak has available to him. His actions are not capricious. Everything points to Damaskinos and his actions against him. This is also why Nomak stands out far more as a character than the other Reapers. While they're byproducts of his infection, Nomak is the original, for even the others share his core affliction, but lack the requisite intelligence and purpose that make him so deadly. What does the Reaper virus actually do to a body? It doesn't take days or even weeks for a victim to turn. Once somebody's infected but is able to survive the bite, the changes that the virus causes in the infected happen extremely fast. Priest in Blade 2 starts showing signs of the change after he's bitten, as his hair falls out, his skin goes pale with veiny patterns appearing across it, and his eyes begin changing into those of a Reaper as the virus takes hold of him. However, the Reaper virus doesn't just have its effects on the strengths of the vampires, as the experiment also alters the traditional weaknesses. The most notable effects include changes to their weaknesses. Reapers are immune to the effects of garlic and immune to the effects of the precious element that normally hurts vampires, silver. As such, they're immune to the common vampire killers and are harder to put down. And although Reapers can still be killed by the sun and can't be in it, as with normal vampires, it was something Damaskinos' experiments were unable to strip from vampires. There's also, however, a price to be paid. In exchange for getting rid of traditional vampire weaknesses and creating a faster, stronger breed of super vampire, most Reapers have lost the ability to reason to any great degree. The virus having effectively made them beasts, they live solely to crave blood and fight. Nomak is a notable exception and can retain all of his intelligence and use his reasoning for attacks, strategy, and the ability to plan, which is, of course, what makes him different from the Reapers he infects and creates. Inside the bite. How does a Reaper's mouth actually work? The most prominent feature about the Reaper probably has to be the mouth, a giant gape to be sure. In Blade 2, the development of that maw has been more of a staged one. The bottom half of the jaw splits and fans outward, opening up the face into something more akin to a wide-mouthed trap. Each part of the jaw possesses a rounded fang, and there's more than a visual purpose. The tooth contains a neurotoxin that probably paralyzes the victim while it feeds. Now here comes the bizarre thing. The long protrusion that appeared like a tongue was actually a muscular tubular siphoner, which emerged between both segments of the jaw and then extruded to reach the victim, where its tip, ringed by small barbs, punched through them to feed on the blood and inject the virus. It didn't just do one thing in this case either. The jaw and fang were designed to restrain the victim, and the proboscis was to do the siphoning as well as injecting the virus. That being said, it made for such a great design. You didn't want to see one specific design for a creature that was too obvious and seemed to have no other purpose but to provide a scary mouth. Why can't you just stake a Reaper? If you saw Blade 2, you're probably well aware that staking a run-of-the-mill vampire isn't exactly one of the toughest tasks out there. That being said, things aren't so simple when you're talking about a Reaper. They, too, have another layer of protection around their hearts, in this case a protective layer of bone, which makes driving a stake straight through the front of their chest nearly impossible. This is highlighted in the autopsy of a captured Reaper during the blood pack's dissection of its peculiar innards. Though that doesn't mean a Reaper's heart is invulnerable. The autopsy reveals that only the side is invulnerable, which is unique to a Reaper and adds even more rules when trying to kill them. Beyond the heart, Reapers are physically superior to average vampires in many ways. Strength, speed, and durability are all increased, as is their regenerative speed. There's one crucial drawback Damaskinos failed to eliminate, however. Reapers are not immune to sunlight. Ultimately, Damaskinos succeeded in partially empowering vampires by eliminating some of their traditional weaknesses, but he didn't achieve complete invulnerability. While harder to put down, the sun still posed an immediate threat. The feeding addiction that's actually killing them. One major downside to their awesome physical attributes comes along with the Reapers: their constant need for blood. Normal vampires, able to survive on blood for a good long time, don't compare to the high metabolic rate Reapers possess. After only a few hours between feedings, they start consuming their own bodies, eventually starving to death. The hunger persists even after the Reaper no longer possesses higher brain functions, making it an automatic biological reaction rather than normal hunger. So, the Reapers were engineered to survive and almost seem built to continue forever. But together with the advantages mentioned above comes the Reaper virus, the biology of which paradoxically makes survival harder on the Reapers, as every moment without blood means the Reaper is the next victim. Even though difficult to defeat in a combat scenario, the Reaper's biggest challenge would have to be the constant pursuit of a blood supply. Real-world roots, the folklore behind the stinger mouth. Also, the Reaper's mouth, much like the lore it supposedly comes from, has the issue of not being overly subtle. One source of that production detail, easily one of the most debated production details in this strand, is the choice to have the Reaper's maw look like a stinger. It's apparently supposed to come from folklore in which a vampire has the capability of producing a stinger-like appendage out of its mouth to feed. While fangs aren't necessarily gone by the time of the film, this gives the Reapers a considerably different way of killing. This stylistic choice can also be why the Reapers aren't just another standard version of vampires. Instead of just larger fangs or a more horrifying look, director Guillermo del Toro opted for a completely separate feeding methodology. A Reaper's jaw splits open and becomes elongated, with the proboscis then extending to feed on the victim. And this concept has lingered with the director. Del Toro revisited a similarly unusual strain of parasitic vampirism on his television series The Strain, although that's a very separate tale. But the Reapers remain a signature creature of Blade 2 and one of the best examples of how much deeper vampire mythology can be taken, as long as the standard fangs and bloody throat ripping can be put aside for a bit. With that said, even though we may have to take the folklore explanation with a pinch of salt, after all it's a production myth-making, we know why Reapers feature the distinctive feeding organ, and it isn't to have them eat people with their standard biting maw instead. Built by hand. How did Del Toro's team physically create the Reapers? The reason why Reapers still look so incredible more than 20 years later is actually that they weren't entirely CGI. The prosthetics and animatronics were handled by Steve Johnson's XFX. The digital creature effects were handled by Tippett Studio. This combination was particularly essential for the creatures' faces. Guillermo del Toro already had the concept for their heads to split into two like an accordion, and needed the effects to be shocking, but also completely credible to the audience. He described himself as having a eureka moment when the first Reaper bite came together through makeup and digital effects. What practical effects added to these creatures that pure digital effects don't have is physicality. XFX designed and built what they physically had to. Then digital extensions were added, such as creature jaw movements and feeding shots. Tippett described how they laid digital prosthetics on top of performance to create the creature's face details. You can see why this was a worthwhile combination. The Reapers don't look like early 2000s CGI. Their skin, jaws, and movements have very tangible and physical presence about them. It creates a sense that there could indeed be a creature in front of the actors, which is the ultimate reason as to why the Reaper's design has aged so well. The most legendary scene in the Reaper's own mythology. Which one actually earns it? To kick things off, this is one sequence that probably deserves a good mention, if not the number one slot. That's the part where at the beginning of Blade 2, Nomak comes into a blood bank in Prague, and the attendants treat him like he's just another donor who's about to give blood, while suddenly his jaw splits open from its normal shape. The blood bank attendants don't realize what they have on their hands until it's too late. It's a quick scene, but right away you know this is a different kind of vampire. However, for the anatomy-centered video, the true best would have to be the Reaper autopsy sequence. The blood pack takes possession of a captured Reaper and is working on finding out what they have at hand, with a few key anatomical features like the bone around its heart as well as its jawline and that crazy feeding device they have located inside it, all explained through this physical structure. That's why this scene holds the number one slot. The Reapers at first really only functioned as some sort of incomprehensible monstrous being, and up until the autopsy they really only served that function and no other purpose in the movie. Suddenly, what appeared to be another horrific monster becomes an anatomy lesson on this thing, and it seems like the film is trying to make itself and us as the audience realize that we have to comprehend something new and bizarre. And to me, this sequence just makes Blade 2 interesting, because for a film that focuses on fights at nearly every opportune moment, deciding not to use this creature's design in another fighting sequence, but instead analyze the creature itself by performing a movie-mandated autopsy just makes it really brilliant. For our video, I thought it was necessary to use this scene, since it pretty much seems to be the movie's own anatomy lesson. Are the Reapers actually from the comics? That's because there's something that can be really confusing if you only know Blade as a Marvel comic character. Blade is a Marvel character, but the Reapers were invented for Blade 2, when writer David S. Goyer, who also developed the story for Blade 2, cooked them up as the main threat for the sequel, and Guillermo del Toro came aboard to direct. Goyer said he came up with a greater threat that would unify Blade and the vampire's goals, which evolved into the Reapers. The same applies to Jared Nomak and his creator, Eli Damaskinos. They're an integral part of Blade 2's new mythology, not taken from any existing comic book narrative. The screenplay actually calls the Reaper strain artificially created, and refers to Jared as the first carrier. And don't even look at the Brian Edwards Hill's recent, and excellent, Blade series. It introduces a whole other mythology beastie called the Adana, that has nothing whatsoever to do with the Reapers as defined by Blade 2, according to Marvel's description. So the Reapers would be entirely fresh to any of you whose only knowledge of the Daywalker comes from Marvel's pages. Built from scratch and developed into their own unique race, the Reapers inhabit their own corner of the Bladeverse and exist separately from the rest of the creatures in Marvel, which is why they feel like something fresh. Where does the Blade franchise stand right now? The MCU's Blade movie, with Mahershala Ali, as of right now, really truly just isn't happening anymore. Mahershala Ali, the Oscar winner the MCU announced as Blade back in 2019, has officially moved on from the project. If they wanted to do it, we would have done it, Ali said during an interview with GQ on July 31st, 2026, clearly indicating that he isn't waiting around for it anymore. And God, this movie had a troubled development history anyway. Bassam Tariq backed out as the director in 2022. Jan Damange took over the reins later in 2022 and left in 2024. And it also went through several writers, but the whole time it was never really solid. Disney eventually cut Blade from its November 2025 slate and removed it entirely from the calendar in October of 2024. There's speculation that Marvel could potentially fold Blade into a team-up with the Midnight Suns or some other vehicle, but again, it's just speculation and not an actual project at this time. And as for a new official live-action Blade film with Mahershala Ali in the title role, there isn't one being actively produced right now. So for right now, you know the movie world is really just that of the previous 3 films. And with that being said, when it comes to the Reapers, Damascenos, and the frankly quite bizarre anatomy we spent the whole video dissecting, the only Marvel movie that gave us all of this was Blade 2. Part of why I feel the Reapers are so unforgettable is it's not that they're tougher than regular vampires, it's that every aspect of their creation comes from the same failed experiment in trying to create something more refined. Damascenos set out to shed all the frailties of vampirism. What resulted, however, possessed a hunger only marginally restrained. Even so, Reapers still can't step out in sunlight. That's why the design's so compelling. Everything comes with a consequence. For Reapers, it was losing all control of the very thing Damascenos thought he had created. So, what other monster do you want to bring into the light? Let us know in the comments below. Please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and make sure you ring that notification bell so you don't miss any more of our videos. My name's Drew. You stay safe,